Keep up with us online by liking the ZTV Sports Report on Facebook, and follow us on Twitter at ZTV Sports, and check out our YouTube page, ZTV Sports, to see our latest videos.
Welcome back. You're watching the ZTV Sports Report. Once again, I'm Anna Tultz. We have Coach's Corner coming up, but before we continue, the ZTV Sports Report is a production of the School of Communication at the University of Akron. If you want to learn more about making award-winning TV programs, contact the School of Communication at 330-972-7600. If you have questions about ZTV programs, email us or visit us online at ztvakron.com. It's time to talk about some Zips football as I hand it over to Chris Coon, who is joined by Tayek and David Coy for the football midseason review. Chris?
Thanks, Anna, and welcome to our midseason review of the Akron Zips football season. Joining me today is the Big Chief Tayek and David Coy. Guys, thanks for joining us. Let's start this slightly round table discussion off by talking about week one of the Zips football season. Really looked lost out there, losing 56-14 to Central Florida. However, you look back to the next week, traveling down to Florida International, they don't get the win, but they play a more competitive game. However, they did lose 41-38 in overtime. How surprising was that team's rebound, going from a very, very, very bad loss in week one to a slightly, I don't want to say good loss, but to a slightly smaller margin of a loss?
Well, compared to years past, it was definitely a step in the right direction, Chris. You think back, to last year when you had consecutive losses by 40 or more, even the last game of the season when you got blown out by almost 50 against Western Michigan. It was a rebound that you hadn't seen yet. And, what stood out for me in that Florida International game was the fact of not once, but twice did they come back and take the lead in that game and almost won it. For all extent purposes. So you don't believe in moral victories, but it was a step in the right direction. You could tell that this team believed in what Terry Bowden's been preaching to them, believed in their talent. Yeah, there's some missing pieces there, and that got exploited later on in the season. But you could tell, though, that it wasn't the previous regime's team anymore. It was definitely Terry Bowden's dadgum-roo football team.
The fact of the matter is they did lose the game. But both teams made mistakes. One thing that really stood out, though, was like a leader like Dalton Williams that had 5 touchdowns and 313 yards, which really showed that this team has a passion. They could be contenders on the season.
Week 3, the Zips come back home to face a much more vanilla opponent in Morgan State. They travel back home, like I said, September 15th. They get the win 66-6. A surge of offense right there. What was your take on that win right there?
Surge, it was an explosion. I mean, there was records set all day. It was something that was nice to see in the fact of, yes, Morgan State was a lesser division team, but they made them look like that compared to last year when you only beat VMI by about 30. The year before that, obviously, the loss in overtime, the Gardner-Webb. So to win 66-6 was, definitely a bright spot, and definitely the thought of, hey, maybe we do have something going here. And it was a good win there over at InfoCision Stadium, Suma Field.
Well, definitely, I thought it was a confidence booster in that game, just winning 66-6. But on top of that, it was actually kind of see what other players can do on that team. You can see the redshirt freshman Kyle Pohl that had 3 touchdowns and 3 for 10. And he's only a redshirt freshman, which is absolutely amazing. On top of that, I was there after the game, inside that locker room. You saw the passion of that team. You saw them actually cry a few times because they were that excited. So it just shows that's what they needed to get a jump start on the season.
We talk about a confidence booster after that game going into Tennessee. You're going to think, Tennessee's going to pretty much, it's going to be Tennessee's game. But for the most part in that game, and I was there at that game, first 3 quarters looked to be a pretty even matchup. Just your take on that game as well.
Well, all you heard, you kind of hit it on the head of, well, they're SEC, well, they're Tennessee, they should have beat Florida the week before, yada, yada, yada. But the fact of the matter was, for about 3.5 quarters, the Akron Zips had a chance to win that game. In the end, I think that the injury to Dalton Williams the week before with his ribs kind of proved to be the difference when he was throwing interceptions towards the end of the game, when he didn't score on the first drive of the second half when you should have, when you got all the way down into the red zone. But the fact of the matter was, you played with them. You showed that, again, like I said, the first 3 weeks, you have something there. You just got to take that next step. And I think that was the difference, though, is that Tennessee has done it before, been there, done that. They have the athletes. With Akron, 1-11, 1-11. Now you're trying to create that culture of taking that next move in the right direction, and you're not there yet, but you're definitely you're peaking right now.
But it shows that we have an offense that has something to be reckoned with. They had, one of the top 10 offenses in the country in yardage, as well as the top 40 in the nation for overall points per game.
Week 5 with MAC play against Miami of Ohio. It was a shootout of a game. Zips lose, however, 56-49. My question is, did that game prove that the Zips can really compete in this Mid-American Conference?
Compete? Yeah, I'll keep my comments to myself about officiating in that game, but probably should have won that game if certain calls went the right way, and I'll keep that to myself again. But yet again, Dalton Williams, the offense, explosion upon explosion. You were scoring at will. It kind of showed, though, too, is that injuries in the secondary were really dividend. Kyle Dicer just threw all over Akron, and when you have over 1,300 yards of total offense between both teams, it was fun for the fans. But if you're a defensive coordinator like Chuck Amato was, kind of scratching your head at the end of that one, like, what could we have done differently? But you played with a team that, outside of Ohio, maybe in the East, could be contending for that East title.
I think Akron can compete in the MAC without a doubt. The thing that I absolutely loved is that I don't want to mention about refs because it would be kind of like a bad decision on our part. But you actually saw a team that wouldn't stop fighting.
Yeah.
At the end of the last drive that Akron had, they kept going. Even though time was a factor, they kept trying and trying. But unfortunately, the time ran out. They just couldn't get that last touchdown. But I love this passion that this football team has.
This Zips defense this season had 4 games where they've given up 40 or more points. What's going on right now? We talked a little bit about that, but let's dive in a little bit more about this defense.
Well, you're very, would be a good word, light in that in a lot of areas right there. You have injuries to Capone and Presley. You lost Wagner in the offseason when he transferred out. Your secondary is very, very, very young. It's just a lot of pieces right now that don't fit the puzzle, and I think Coach Amato's trying to figure out what puzzle that is. And should he play zone? Should he play man? And it's kind of tough when you get exploited like you did against Miami. But you follow it up, you cut that deficit in almost more than half the next week, and if you can do it in the future games when you have to face like a Tyler Tettleton from Ohio, and then NIU is going to have a good offense here in a couple weeks. You can start figuring out that puzzle a bit.
I feel like Coach Amato is still kind of feeling out the defense. You could see they're getting better, but sometimes they're still struggling. It's their first year having the new regime. It's a little different for him coming into a new setting and everything, so I understand.
Zips, they haven't had a sophomore running back for the Akron Zips. Juwan Chisholm is almost halfway to 1,000 yards. Last year looked like he was going to hit that 1,000-yard mark, but he kind of slowed down there. The Zips haven't had a 1,000-yard rusher, though, since 2008, and Dennis Kennedy.
Mr.
Is
Kennedy.
this the year the Zips have a 1,000-yard rusher?
I think so. You got a nice offense in terms of you have a lot in the pass game, but the pass has been setting up the run a lot. Safeties have to back up, and you have a bruiser type, but with speed, though, at the same time with Chisholm. And, you saw him be so effective against Miami. He got shut down a bit in the second half against, Bowling Green, but the first half, though, was effective again. I think he'll reach that 1,000-yard mark. He's getting there. It's just a matter of can he stay healthy too, and that was a big thing that happened. He got beat up towards the end of the year last year, and you're going to be playing some defenses coming up here that are pretty good against the run, namely Kent State, and we'll get to them in a bit. But I think you have some opportunities though that you can have big games rushing.
Kent State and Akron, always a good matchup as these two rivals will face each other at Kent. Is this the year the Zips, though, however, bring the wagon wheel back to the UA campus?
Hey, why not? Coach Bowden at the beginning of the year said, we're going to beat Kent State and we're going to bring home the wagon wheel. He said that against VCU. You can look on the ZTV Sports Report page to find that clip. But that being said, I think a lot of things going to come down to is, one, how healthy is the defense, the secondary especially. And then 2 is how much is the offense clicking at that point? If is the wheels still going in motion with Dalton Williams and Chisholm and company? If that's going to happen, you're going to probably get a very, very good game over there.
Well, if you look at the past few years, you can actually see this is the time to do it. The offense is looking pretty hot. The passion is there. On top of that, the team is really progressing. So it can happen. The rivalry game is happening, so that means it's just going to be fight, 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 passion. It doesn't matter about stats before that.
One thing to keep in mind about Kent State is that you don't really know how good this Kent State team is. You know, their record is very good, but at the same time, who have they really played? They played Eastern Michigan, who hasn't won a game yet at all. You know, Townsend, you know, you went the wrong way on a punt return in that game. And then you beat Ball State, was at home, you blew a big lead, and then you came back and won. Yeah, they have weapons, Tree Archer being one of and then, you know, Spencer Keith being a veteran quarterback for them. And they have a good defense, but again, who have they really played is the really big question mark as well.
Looking like a lot like 2009 when Kent State was on that run where they could have possibly went to a bowl game. Zips make the upset at home that year, and that kind of derailed their season for a bowl. So we'll see. Moving on, though, the Zips, the second half of the season, have to put together some wins in conference play, but what's this in your minds, what's your final win prediction for this team?
Well, you've shown the potential 2 wins, and I've kind of mentioned this throughout this whole roundtable or semi-roundtable discussion of the fact of you just got to make that next step in figuring out ways to win. And I see them in the second half of the year finishing around 4-8, 3-9, 4-8. I see them getting wins over UMass. Heck, why not get a win at home against NIU and Kent State at Kent State? We're going to throw the record books out. You mentioned 2009. I think that's going to happen again over at Kent State, and Zips finish 4-8 on the year.
I say 3-9 on the year. Again, 2 more than last year. I think they can upset at Kent State. I think that UMass isn't doing well in the first year in the MAC. But Northern Illinois, they've been really well this year, like last year. And Central Michigan is one of those iffy ones. I think maybe if Akron can show up and play really well like they did against Miami, I think they can take it. But I'll be safe, and I'll go with 3-9.
The one thing, Chris, is I don't think it's going to be like years past, though, in terms of towards the end of the year, you saw that Zips team just kind of dismantle and you're getting blown out 56-10. No, I think they're going to be competitive, even in the last game of the year. Even if you have nothing to play for when you're playing Toledo on the day after Thanksgiving, is that you're going to see them be competitive. Terry Bowden's going to have this team ready to go no matter who they're playing.
And there you have it, the Akron Zips football midseason review right here. I want to thank David Coy and the Big Chief Ian Tayek for joining me, and I want to send it right back to Anna.
After the break, Coach Croft returns to the Coach's Corner. You are watching the ZTV Sports Report.